extreme urgency with which
international relations by curbing territorial avarice and by embracing peaceful cooperation. In this regard, we draw attention to the continued overt threats to Guyana's territorial integrity and sovereignty by the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Just recently, an agreement was issued in Mexico City by which the contending internal factions in Venezuela renewed a baseless claim to 2/3 of Guyana's territory. We have responded in clear terms, and I repeat our response now in these hallowed halls in which nations of the world meet in peace and cooperation. Guyana cannot be used as an altar of sacrifice for the settlement of Venezuela's internal political differences. While my government welcomes effort to bring about domestic harmony within Venezuela, agreements that defy international law and processes can be no basis for mediating such harmony. Guyana does not promote the use of violence or threats to settle disputes. In a 1966 agreement signed in Geneva, Venezuela consented to allow the UN Secretary General to decide on the means of settlement of this controversy. The Secretary General decided on the International Court of Justice. Both parties are therefore bound by the court's jurisdiction and ultimate decision. Mr. President, we remain concerned about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Guyana restates its solidarity with the Palestinian people and their desire for a dignified existence in their homeland in accordance with a two-state solution. The international community must act to meet the legitimate concerns of the Palestinians who have suffered far too long. Mr. President, the strained relations between the United States and Cuba are also a matter of deep concern to our region. We are convinced that normalization of relations between Cuba and the United States would have a beneficial impact on peace in the hemisphere and greater prosperity for all. Mr. President, I turn now to my own country, Guyana, a land of many ethnicities, drawn from its Amerindian people, people transported from Africa in the genocidal slave trade, people from India who were indentured to labor in a new land, people from Europe who migrated at a time of want and persecution, and people from China who were also brought to work on the plantations. They came with different religions, different cultures, and different perspectives. In the collective of their diversity, the people of Guyana are representative of the peoples of the world. Whilst politically driven conflicts arise occasionally, and differences have been exploited for narrow political purposes, my government is convinced that the richness of our people's diversity is a gift to our nation. We continue to build a nation that draws on all aspects of its cultural roots, to establish citizens who enjoy equal opportunity in all aspects of our society, a nation that is secure in itself and strong in its outlook. Our intention is to make Guyana an example for the world, utilizing the strength of our diversity for a single tapestry of one nation, which is indivisible, strong, secure, and prosperous. My government has set its foot firmly on the ladder to climb to that pinnacle of success. We are confident that as we foster peace and prosperity within our country, respect human rights, uphold democracy and the rule of law, and abide with our Constitution, we will achieve these noble goals. Mr. President, it is against this background of ambition for my country that my government embraces the vision set out in Secretary General's report entitled Our Common Agenda. We embrace his view that our nations must be driven by solidarity, that he so eloquently described as, and I quote, the principle of working together, recognizing that we are bound to each other and that no community or country, however powerful, can solve its challenges alone. End of quote. Mr. President, our common agenda provides the framework for emergence of a post-COVID-19 era, which addresses the world's fragilities, injustices, inequalities, conflicts, the eradication of poverty, banishment of racism and gender discrimination, and to realize ecological justice. Guyana looks forward to revitalize United Nations, spearheading the thrust towards a new era in international relations, in which the world emerges as a better, fairer, and stronger place for all mankind. I thank you, and God bless you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Mogwitsi Eric Kibetswe Masisi, President of the Republic of Botswana. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Mogwitsi Eric Kibetswe Masisi, President of the Republic of Botswana, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, allow me on behalf of the Republic of Botswana, and indeed on my own behalf, to join previous speakers in extending our congratulations to you personally and the Republic of Maldives on your well-deserved election as President of the United Nations General Assembly at its 76th session. Your election to the helm of this august body is a clear testament that the international community holds both you and your great country, the Maldives, in high regard and esteem. This is not surprising given the immense experience and career accomplishments you bring to this position, spanning over 3.5 decades. I'm fully confident that the United Nations General Assembly will benefit tremendously from your extensive diplomatic, executive, and legislative experience. As we continue to battle against and strive to recover from the dreadful COVID-19 pandemic and many other pre-existing global challenges, such as the climate crisis, your vision statement, which is anchored on 5 rays of hope, serves as an inspiration to many, including my own country, Botswana. In this respect, it is gratifying to note that your vision speaks to the topical issues confronting humanity to date, which will remain on top of the agenda of the United Nations. These include human rights, climate change, gender equality and the empowerment of women, terrorism and violent extremism, inequalities and injustices. As Botswana, we are pleased that you have prioritized these issues and committed to deliver for people, planet and prosperity, consistent with your firm belief in multilateralism and international cooperation. Mr. President, let me in the same breath take this opportunity to pay a befitting tribute to your predecessor, His Excellency Volkan Bozkır, for his effective guidance and leadership during one of the most challenging General Assembly sessions in the 75 years of the United Nations existence. The pandemic challenges as member states and him as president of this esteemed body to be innovative and creative to ensure business continuity in order to keep the wheels of the United Nations running. Notwithstanding the limitations imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic, We welcome the fact that under the able leadership of the outgoing President of the General Assembly, we successfully convened some of the most important high-level meetings of the 75th session. These included the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, the first ever summit on biodiversity, the 25th anniversary of the 4th World Conference on Women, dialogue on support to least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states, digital cooperation, reform of the Security Council, and a revitalization of the General Assembly. Most importantly, also was the convening of the 31st special session of the General Assembly in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which ensured that as member states, we demonstrate our collective resolve to come together in support of effective global response to the unprecedented impacts of the pandemic and reinforce the principles of solidarity and shared humanity. Mr. President, my delegation therefore fully endorses your choice of the theme for the 76th session, namely building resilience through hope to recover from COVID-19, rebuild sustainably, respond to the needs of the planet, respect the rights of people, and revitalize the United Nations. The theme is consistent with the actions we need to take collectively to fulfill the legitimate expectations and aspirations of the people we serve at this difficult time in our history. Mr. President, we welcome your clarion call for hope because it sets a much-needed optimistic tone for this session, given the extreme urgency with which we must act under the challenging circumstances we find ourselves. Hope is a virtue that is at the very core of human progress. History is replete with examples of great things that can be achieved when hope is chosen over fear and despair. Our great organization that was founded after the devastating Second World War is itself a product and manifestation of hope. Even in the midst of the worst pandemic in a century, our actions should be driven by the belief that things can and will be better. A year ago, when I had the honor of addressing this noble assembly, we were all in shock as the pandemic wrecked through our national health systems, taking many lives, destroying livelihoods, overturning life as we know it, and ushering in a new normal of lockdowns and social distancing. A year later, we're still in the throes of the pandemic. However, advances in science has enabled the rapid development of vaccines. Given that science has delivered the vaccines, now it is time for world leaders, guided by the ideals of the United Nations Charter, to ensure that this life-saving resource is distributed equitably. Without a doubt, a worldwide vaccination campaign that ensures that all countries, especially the developing countries, have urgent access if we are to contain the continuing spread of this deadly virus and its more transmissible variants. Mr. President, it is for this reason that Botswana shares the frustration by many and strongly supports a call for the vaccines to be treated as a global public good, as this is key to recovery and rebuilding better from the COVID-19 pandemic. I take this opportunity to commend the efforts made by some of the developed countries to support developing countries, especially those in Africa, which have very low vaccination rates. I wish to thank sincerely our development partners who have donated vaccines and other forms of assistance to Botswana, in particular to help to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, which is spreading exponentially now in my country and claiming many lives. The donation is an indication that the global community is slowly heeding the call by the Secretary General that no one is safe until everyone is safe. But we have also seen how the uncontrolled spread of the virus triggers the emergence of new variants. A more equitable global vaccination rollout program is urgently needed if we are to win the race against the new variants. Let us be mindful of the fact that a variant somewhere is a variant everywhere. Mr. President, I'm happy to inform that my government has prioritized saving our people from this pandemic. In addition to encouraging our people to practice the necessary COVID-19 preventive measures, we have also channeled extra resources to the health sector. This includes purchasing of vaccines through the COVAX facility, the African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team, AVAT, and through bilateral arrangements. While we have purchased enough vaccines to reach herd immunity, the current logistical supply challenges continue to hamper our vaccination plans. However, the slow rollout of vaccination programs in the global south, including my own country, cannot be solely viewed in terms of economic laws of demand and supply. Let us accept that the prevailing vaccine inequity is the real problem and a reflection of the inherent weaknesses of our multilateral system. We must therefore recommit both in deeds and words to the pledge we made at the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of this organization to strengthen international cooperation, coordination, and solidarity. One way of doing so is through the sharing and transfer of knowledge and waiver of intellectual property rights on vaccine production. We are ready to work with all stakeholders to make this a reality. We in Botswana are open to capacity strengthening for the production of COVID-19 vaccines. In order to make the desired impact under your able leadership, the United Nations system, and especially the principal organs, must work closely together and act jointly in a coordinated way. While my country holds the presidency of the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, we will strive together with you, Mr. President, to strengthen coordination and collaboration between the two principal organs of the United Nations that we lead. As you indicated in your vision statement, this will assist to make the United Nations stronger and more effective in discharging its mandate. Mr. President, our economies are still reeling from the impact of the heavy blow inflicted by the unparalleled scale of the pandemic. For small economies in particular, pre-existing challenges have been worsened on the economic mainstays such as trade, tourism, and the extractive industry. This undermines our ability to implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its SDGs. Unfortunately, it is the most vulnerable and neediest in our societies who run the risk of being left furthest behind. However, all is not lost. I am hopeful that if we press the reset button, reaffirm our commitment to multilateral ideals, and we accelerate the implementation of SDGs in this decade of action, as you rightly point out also in your vision statement, Mr. President, financing, trade, technology, and debt sustainability are some of the prerequisites for attaining the goals. My delegation has also taken note of your call for rebuilding back better, stronger, greener, and bluer. We could not agree more. The idea of doing different things differently is in line with our current approach at home. Upon realizing the scale of disruption occasioned by the pandemic, my government has instituted a reset agenda which comprises 5 priorities that are also aligned to the priority themes of your presidency. Firstly, the government is fully committed to save Botswana's population from COVID-19 through health programs that include vaccination. Secondly, we are reforming the public service to ensure effective implementation of government policies. Thirdly, we are accelerating digitalization in the delivery of services by government and creating enabling conditions for the active involvement of the private sector and society in the uptake and utilization of digital technologies. Our 4th priority is value chain development. This entails unlocking more value in key sectors such as mining, tourism, agriculture, and education by way of innovation and creativity of our people, especially the youth. This priority is aimed at accelerating economic diversification and youth empowerment and the employment. The 5th priority relates to mindset change. Here, the aim is to inspire people to own the national development goals, as well as to embrace the goals of both disposition and action. My government believes that the reset agenda and its priorities, which are in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, will enable us to recover from it stronger and to realize our development aspirations as enshrined in our National Vision 2036 and the 11th National Development Plan. These national frameworks are aligned to the global blueprint or in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the African Union's Continental Agenda 2063. We are, however, mindful of the fact that in an increasingly interdependent setting, Botswana's development trajectory is inextricably linked with that of the rest of the world. Now more than ever, multilateralism, international cooperation, and global solidarity is imperative. The onus is therefore on this Assembly as the main deliberative, policy-making, and representative organ of the UN to strive for a better world. a world where no country is left behind in attaining the 17 SDG goals. Beyond what we can do as individual countries, it is also our hope that the lessons being learned from this pandemic will enable the United Nations to find innovative ways for enhanced collaboration with regional and sub-regional organizations to ensure preparedness for future pandemics and epidemics. Mr. President, you assume your global leadership role at a time when the world is grappling with a myriad of other pressing global challenges, including devastating natural disasters associated with climate change, with small island countries among the most vulnerable. In the recent months, massive and uncontrolled floods swept across Western Europe, Asia and other places, destroying riverbanks, homes, and killing hundreds in their wake. Hurricanes, typhoons, and storms, as we just again witnessed in countries like Haiti, the United States, and other places, are a major cause of devastation to critical infrastructure worth billions and contributory to humanitarian crisis. In the same wavelength, my own region, Southern Africa, has not been spared from the atrocious path of climate change. He included disasters as evidenced by the rainy seasons, triggering floods, and combined with the devastating cyclones Kenneth and Idai and Cyclone Eloise. This recurrent situation also calls for our region to strengthen its early warning and disaster preparedness mechanisms through regional collaboration with all stakeholders with the support of the United Nations. Whereas the past decade has already been the hottest in our planet, in recent months, more record-breaking temperatures and other climate change-induced incidents signal the real danger of increased global warming. The International Panel on Climate Change has again recently warned of a code red for humanity. Today, more than ever before, our planet has evidently become dangerously warmer, triggering melting ice, rising seas, floods, cyclones, hurricanes, droughts, and other extreme weather events. Combined with air pollution, these events destroy impeccable ecosystems, leading to negative repercussions for sustainable development, health, and food production systems, as well as food security. Mr. President, we have all along recognized that climate change is the greatest challenge we face, and indeed a real existential threat, demanding the urgent need to take bold measures to regulate the manner in which we interact with our environment by, among others, adopting technologies that reduce carbon emissions. I'd like to still believe that we can prevent the situation from getting much worse and provide innovative solutions. As former Secretary General Kofi Annan once reminded us, the world is not ours to keep. We hold it in trust for future generations. In September 2015, we committed ourselves to working tirelessly for the full implementation of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in all its three dimensions, being economic, social, environmental, in a balanced and integrated manner that also embraced the full respect for the enjoyment of all fundamental human rights. In the interest of time, Mr. President, I will skip and deposit the rest for the record, only to finish by saying it is regrettable that at a time when the main battle should be won against an invisible enemy, COVID-19, we continue to witness acts of violence which seek to take advantage and further threaten international peace and security. In our sub-region, where I had the privilege to serve as chair of the Southern Africa Development Community, SADC, organ on politics, defense, and security until recently in August 2021, we have committed to countering and eliminating the threat of terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. In addition to the threat to peace and stability brought about by terrorist insurgents in Mozambique, which we condemn, sanctions against Zimbabwe are a setback to our stability in the region. Botswana therefore calls on the international community to end sanctions against Zimbabwe. At the national level, my government continues to take steps towards keeping our people safe and thus contributing to the larger ideal of the maintenance of international peace and security. In this connection, my government has signed a memorandum of understanding with the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism in June 2021 with a view to enhance Botswana's capabilities and ability to better detect and deter terrorism. Mr. President, in concluding my remarks, let me reaffirm Botswana's abiding faith in the principles and purposes of the Charter of the United Nations, as well as the various multilateral instruments, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other protocols calling for universal access to education, good quality health care, food, rights of people with disabilities, women and children, as well as creating adequate opportunities for our youth population. Let me reassure you, Mr. President, of my country's full support, commitment, and cooperation in enabling you to fulfill your mandate during this 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. I thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Botswana for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba to introduce an address by the head of state.
Señor Presidente.
President, I have the honor of introducing the statement, a pre-recorded statement of the President of the Republic of Cuba, Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermúdez.
Señor Secretario General.
Secretary General, Mr. President, we are living in uncertain times under the devastating impact of a pandemic which has sharpened the structural inequalities as well as global crisis. The role of multilateralism and of the United Nations are increasingly important, and international cooperation has been inadequate. The application of neoliberal formulas during decades has reduced the abilities of states to address the needs of their population. The most vulnerable have remained without protection, while the richest nations, the elites, and pharmaceutical transnationals are increasing their profits. Combining efforts and determination for the good of humankind is not only urgent today, it's also morally crucial. More than 4.5 million people have died as a result of the pandemic, which has worsened living conditions on the planet. Its consequences and impact throughout all of our societies are incalculable, but already we know that they will not be short-lived. We can see this in the report on the Sustainable Development Goals of 2021, while the International Labor Organization says that in 2022 there will be in the world 205 million unemployed persons. It is clear to all that we have already seriously undermined the objective for sustainable development to eradicate poverty for 2030, a time when it is projected that the global poverty rate will be 7%, around 600 million people. In this bleak context, COVID-19 vaccines are the only hope. More than 5 billion doses have already been administered throughout the world by August 2021. However, more than 80% of those were applied in middle-income or high-income countries, and their populations represent much less than half of the total population of the planet. Hundreds of millions of people in low-income countries are still awaiting for their first dose, and they don't even know when they will receive it. While this is happening, it is inconceivable that in 2020, a global military expenditure was almost $2 trillion. How many lives would have been saved if those resources had been devoted to health or to the production and distribution of vaccines? The possible responses to this question involves a paradigm shift and to transform a deeply unequal and anti-democratic international order which places selfishness and petty interests of a minority before the legitimate aspirations of millions of human beings. We will never tire of repeating that we must put an end to this waste and irrational capitalist consumption and production patterns, to environmental degradation, and to the factors that cause climate change, which threaten the existence of the human species. Our effort must be collective, but developed countries have the moral obligation to assume the greatest responsibility because they're the ones who caused the current situation and they have the resources to correct it. We have to fight so that solidarity, cooperation, and mutual respect will prevail if we want to provide an effective response to the needs and yearnings of all of those peoples and to preserve what is most valuable, human life and human dignity. Our peoples have the right to live in peace and security, to development, to well-being, and to social justice. A United Nations which is revitalized, democratized, and strengthened is called upon to play a central role in this effort. Mr. President, under the leadership and with the ongoing incitement of the United States, we see a serious international rift being promoted with the harmful use and abuse of economic coercive measures, which has become a central instrument of U.S. foreign policy. The government of that country is threatening, extorting, and pressuring sovereign states to take a stand and to act against those who they identify as their adversaries. They demand that their allies build coalitions to overthrow legitimate governments. They default on trade commitments. They abandon and ban certain technologies, and they apply unjustified judicial measures against citizens of countries who don't bend to their will. They often use the term international community to define a small group of governments that accompany Washington's will without questioning it. The other countries, the vast majority of members of this organization, it seems that there is no room for us in the definition of international community which is advocated by the United States. It is a behavior which is associated with cultural and ideological intolerance, with a marked racist influence, and with hegemonic aims. It's not possible or acceptable that we identify the right to economic and technological development of a nation as a threat, as it's not possible to question the right of a state to develop a political, economic, social, and cultural system which is sovereignly chosen by its people. In other words, we are seeing today unacceptable political practices in the international context that go against the universal commitment to defend the United Nations Charter, including the sovereign right to self-determination. Independent and sovereign states are being subject to all kinds of pressure to bend to the will of Washington and to an order based on its capricious rules. Mr. President, for more than 60 years, the government of the United States has not refrained for 1 minute in its attacks against Cuba, but in this crucial and challenging moment for all nations, its aggressiveness has gone beyond the limits. The most cruel and the longest economic, commercial, and financial blockade which has ever been imposed on any country has intensified in an opportunistic and criminal fashion in the midst of this pandemic. And the current Democratic administration is maintaining, without altering, the 243 coercive measures adopted by the administration of Donald Trump, including adding Cuba to the spurious and immoral list of countries that allegedly sponsor terrorism. It's in this context that they're launching against our country a non-conventional war, where the U.S. government has dedicated publicly millions of dollars through campaigns of lies and manipulation, which use new information technologies and other digital platforms to project inside and outside the country a totally false image of the Cuban reality, sowing confusion, aiming to destabilize, to discredit the country, and to justify the regime change doctrine. They have done all this to wipe the Cuban Revolution off the map. They don't accept alternatives to the model that they conceive of for their backyard. Their plan is perverse and incompatible with the democracy and the freedom that they advocate. But our enemies must know clearly that we will not surrender the fatherland and the revolution that several generations of patriots have bequeathed to us. I'd like to reiterate today before the respected and real community of nations that every year has voted unanimously against the blockade what was expressed a few years ago by General Raul Castro, and I quote, "Cuba is not afraid of lies, nor will it kneel to pressure, conditions, or impositions, wherever they may come from." Mr. President, the colossal challenges do not intimidate us. We continue to build for Cuba. We practice selfless solidarity with those who require our support. And we are also grateful for the support we receive from governments, peoples, friends, and the Cuban community outside of Cuba. I would like to thank all of those for their support at this situation, people who extol the values of humankind and unconditional international sovereign cooperation. At the same time, in response to the requests received and guided by our vocation of solidarity and humanism, Cuba has sent 4,900 assistants, organized in 57 medical brigades, to 40 countries and territories affected by COVID-19. Those dedicated healthcare workers have not relented 1 minute in their fight against the pandemic inside and outside of Cuba. They're the same ones who took to the streets to help the patient people after the devastating earthquake just a few weeks ago, those who travel from a remote place to a Cuban province without stopping to deliver their expertise and their knowledge in their mission to save lives. They are more than daily heroes, the pride of our nation and symbol of our vocation for justice. Dozens of public figures and thousands of people have signed their candidacy for the Nobel Peace Prize. Likewise, we are proud of the scientific Cuban community, who, in the midst of great shortcomings, have developed 3 vaccines and vaccine candidates against COVID-19. They represent the embodiment of the idea of the Commander-in-Chief, who asserted that the future of our homeland must necessarily be a future of men and women of science. Thanks to the support of our men and women of science and healthcare workers, during the first 10 days of this month, more than 15.8 million doses of the Abdala, Soberana 02 and Soberana Plus vaccines have been administered, and 37.8% of the Cuban population is fully vaccinated. We expect to achieve full immunization by the end of 2021, which will make it possible for us to advance in the struggle against the new outbreak of the pandemic. Mr. President, we ratify our aspiration to achieve full independence of our America and to be a socially and economically integrated Latin American and Caribbean nation, capable of living up to the commitment established in the Proclamation of Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace, in the face of attempts to reimpose the Monroe Doctrine and the neo-colonial domination. We are opposed to every attempt to destabilize and to subvert the constitutional order and the civic and military unity and destroy the work that was initiated by Commander Hugo Chavez Frias and continued by President Nicolas Maduro Moros in favor of the Venezuelan people. We reiterate that the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela will always be able to count on Cuba's solidarity. We reaffirm our firm support to the brotherly people of Nicaragua and its National Reconciliation and Unity Government, led by Commander Daniel Ortega, who are courageously and proudly defending the achievements attained against the threats and interventionist actions of the U.S. government. We support the Caribbean nation's claim for fair reparations for the horrors caused by slavery and the slave trade. We likewise support the right to a just, special, and differentiated treatment, which is crucial to meet the challenges resulting from climate change, natural disasters, the unjust international financial system, and the difficult conditions imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic. We reaffirm that the brotherly people of Puerto Rico should be free and independent after more than a century of submission to colonial domination. We stand in solidarity with the Republic of Argentina in its just claim for its sovereign rights over the Malvinas, the South Georgia and South Sandwich Islands, and the surrounding maritime areas. We reiterate our commitment to peace in Colombia. We are convinced that a political solution and a dialogue between the parties is the appropriate way to achieve it. We also call for an end to foreign interference in Syria and full respect for its sovereignty and territorial integrity, while we support the search for a peaceful and negotiated solution to the situation imposed on that sister nation. We call for a just, comprehensive, all-encompassing and lasting solution to the Middle East conflict, which includes the end of the Israeli occupation of the usurped Palestinian territories and the exercise of the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to build its own state within the pre-1967 borders and with East Jerusalem as its capital. We condemn the unilateral coercive measures imposed against the Islamic Republic of Iran. We reaffirm our unswerving solidarity with the Saharan people. We strongly condemned the unilateral and unjust sanctions against the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. We reiterate our unwavering support to the One China principle and oppose any attempt to harm the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the People's Republic of China, as well as any interference in its internal affairs. We reject the attempts to expand NATO's presence up to the Russian borders. The interference in Russia's affairs with regard to its sovereignty and the imposition of unilateral and unjust sanctions against that country. We call for an end to foreign interference in the internal affairs of the Republic of Belarus and reiterate our solidarity with President Alexander Lukashenko and the brotherly people of Belarus. The United Nations cannot ignore the lessons learned in Afghanistan. It took 2 decades of occupation, a toll of thousands of deaths, 10 million displaced, and billions of dollars in costs, which turned into profits for the military-industrial complex. It took all that to reach the conclusion that terrorism cannot be prevented or fought with bombs, that occupation only leads to destruction, and that no country has the right to impose its will on sovereign nations. Afghanistan is not an isolated case. It became obvious that wherever the United States intervenes, instability, death, and hardship increase, leaving behind long-lasting scars. Mr. President, we reaffirm Cuba's determination to continue speaking the truth in a transparent fashion, however much this might be upsetting to some, defending the principles and values we believe in, supporting just causes, confronting violations as much as we have confronted foreign aggressions, colonialism, racism, and apartheid, and struggling ceaselessly for the greatest possible justice, prosperity, and development of our peoples, who deserve a better world. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Cuba for the statement just made. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency João Manuel Gonzalez Lourenço, President of the Republic of Angola. I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency João Manuel Gonzalez Lourenço, President of the Republic of Angola, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Excellency. Your Excellency, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, President of the 76th Session of the United Nations General Assembly, Heads of State,